Right, in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about when I use WD-40. And of course, you can use whatever you want for whatever you want to do. But this is just my rule of thumb on when I use WD-40 or silicone spray or any other type of lubricant to work on things like rubber and things like that. Let's move on to it. Now, as a general rule, when I'm working with coolant, I use coolant to lubricate. Sometimes if I have a real difficult thing, I'll use a little bit of soap on that because those two things can work together. When I'm working on brake parts, I only use brake fluid to lubricate parts. That is, the ones that are exposed to brake fluid, really, as a general rule, that's a really safe thing to do. Don't use any kind of regular petroleum products. The rubber that they put in these is not designed to touch that kind of thing. When I'm putting on a tire, I don't use WD-40 to lubricate, to put the tire on. That can be a problem. I only use soap and water for that. I typically do not use silicone spray, and I'll explain to you why later in the video. And I know there's a lot of people that swear by you got to use silicone spray on everything, and I'm going to tell you why I don't. I had some window rubber that I put in my bus, not in this one, but I had the bus for 30 years and I put it in with WD-40, and 30 years later there was no cracking on the rubber. It didn't have any issues that would tell me that that's going to be an issue to use. But I have people tell me all the time that I should use silicone spray for that. Seems to be like keyboard mechanics. You guys can all put your comments in now. Seem to know more than a guy who's doing this for 40 years. Because they watched the video. Now there is rubber hose that is designed for fuel, like this one. There's rubber hose that's designed for brake fluid, which is this one. They kind of look the same, but they're different. And there is rubber hose that is designed for diesel, which is even different. I don't have any of it right here. And there is rubber hose that is designed for oil, or there's a rubber hose that's designed for 80, 90, or usually it's SAE or something like that, that's designed for oil or whatever, power steering fluid, which is an oil product type of thing. There's hoses that are designed for all those things. So there is a lot of different rubber compositions that are designed for different applications. So it all depends on what rubber you're exposing to what. So again, if I'm doing coolant, I will use coolant as a lubricant. If I'm doing engine oil and it's an engine oil rubber that is exposed to, I will use engine oil or WD-40 as a lubricant if I need to. If it's grease, even then I'll use grease as a lubricant. And if it's brake fluid, I will use brake fluid as a lubricant. As a general rule, those are things that I've learned from day one as a mechanic in high school, and I'm 58 years old, so that's a few years. Is that 40? I got a little longer than that probably. All right, so let's get back to the window rubber thing. A lot of people say if I don't use soap and water, then I'm ruining the rubber. I've just told you that I put the rubber in 30 years later. The rubber was still in perfect condition. No cracking, nothing. Use WD-40. So the myth is busted on that one. But your question might be, Mike, you could use soap and water to put the window in. Yes, I could. I could use soap and water if I needed to lubricate, especially these windows fit really tight, but I use WD-40. I could also use silicone spray to put those in. Those are all the options, right? And everybody will tell me that WD-40 will ruin the rubber. Done it 40 years ago, 30 years ago, had the rubber, took it back out. The window rubber was in still really good shape. I ended up replacing the rubber because it was actually more work to get them out than trying to use the rubber again. So I ended up just cutting it, but it was in perfect condition because it was kind of stuck to the surface. And yes, the WD-40 completely dried out of it because it was completely stuck to the surface underneath. But you might say, Mike, you could use soap and water to put them in. And yes, I could use soap and water. But the reason that I had the windows out of this thing is because this was super rusty. A lot of this bus was rusty, and I'm trying to not have rust again. So when I entrap water underneath my rubber, what's going to happen? Eventually, that could wear its way through the paint, and I'll have rust again. So I would prefer using something that I know worked for 30 years, which was WD-40, than using water, soap and water. Third option, use silicone spray. Now, if you've been around the block a little bit, go ahead and just take that silicone spray. Don't do this, please, by the way. Just take a bunch of silicone spray and spray it all over your paint, and then try to paint over that. You'll learn a lesson real quick. Silicones etch their way into paint and make it very difficult to have to paint over that a lot of times. Now, I'm not going to say silicone spray specifically does it. I don't know if they've reformulated this stuff, but the stuff I used years ago, if I used silicone spray to put my windows in, it was going to be a problem if I had to do touch up on my car. And the chemicals that I'd have to use, if I could even get them to work, to remove the silicone would damage the rubber even worse than just putting a mild solvent like what's in WD-40. One of the old tricks from years ago was use mineral spirits to remove grease and dirt from things, and that worked fine. The reason that a lot of people don't do it now is because it's not available in a lot of places. Or in places like California, mineral spirits is actually acetone. So it's, I don't know how they got away with that, right? It says on the can, mineral spirits, pour it out, it's acetone. Now, I can tell you that acetone could possibly damage rubber, if anything could, but it dries out so fast that even that, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I can't tell you how many times back over the years where we used acetone or lacquer thinner to wipe down old rubber to get rid of the residue that's on it and to mask the window to get the paint tape to stick, and we never had any issues. So I was putting on these axle boots and I was using WD-40 to lubricate these things to put them on, and the reason I use that is because, again, it dries out of it. Well, I haven't read the label on one of these things in years, but I believe it has paint or mineral spirits and kerosene and a few other things like that. There are solvents that kind of dry the oils out of it pretty quickly. That's why I don't usually use WD-40 as a permanent lubricant. It just doesn't last on anything. I would prefer using an oil like this to lubricate something like a bearing. And I don't usually use WD-40 for that. I usually use it for things like what I did with that boot. I put it on the surface, use it to slide the boot on, make it much easier, and most of what is in this dissolves and disappears in a few days. And because, for instance, this is a oil product that this is constantly exposed to gear oil, this boot is right here, and everybody told me it's gonna not last. The last set I put on has been on there over 5 years and no cracking, so myth is busted on that again. The new original ones from the factory lasted about 5-6 years, and that's it. So if you want to comment that, go ahead. You too can spend the next 40 years to learn everything that I've learned. Go for it. Or you can learn it the fast and easy way. It is entirely up to you. So I'm not going to be the one that tells you when to use WD-40 and when to use silicone spray and all that stuff. These are just the reasons that I do it. And you can learn from me or you can decide not to. It's up to you. I can be totally wrong. For 40 years, I'll be totally wrong. That's fine. And I'll keep doing it the way I do. And when I find out something that doesn't work, I change. And so far, I haven't needed to. So I'm not really sure where this can came from because I don't normally buy it. But I don't like to have it around. I don't like to have silicones around when I do painting because I have been through those problems and I don't want to go back to them. Just like we learned a long time ago, Armor All, in my opinion, ruins rubber. That silicone that goes into that rubber etches its way in there and just causes it, I don't know what it does to it, but for some reason it's massive amounts of silicone in that stuff, and it just ruins the stuff. I've seen rubber crack in a year. Put it on your tires, year later all the tires are cracked. Tire dressing, that's what you use on that. It's different. Or you do like I do, paint them. So what I can tell you is just don't be totally stupid about it. Don't take vacuum hose and expose it to WD-40 or expose it to, you know, any kind of a petroleum. It just doesn't work. The hose is not required, not designed for that. And people go, oh, well, look, see, I got vacuum hose and I got it exposed to WD-40. I let it sit in it for like 3 days and look at it swelled up. I mean, dude, that's not designed for that. The vacuum hose is not designed to be exposed to any kind of petroleum product at all. So, don't be stupid. Think about what you're doing and think about what you're putting it on. And like I said, my opinion, what I've had, window rubber, I've never had an issue with it. For some reason, the rubber composition seems to be okay. For some things, maybe it will. Like if you're using it on a vacuum hose or using it on brake parts, oh my God, don't do that. Never, no, I've seen so many problems. I used to get cars in the shop. They would put transmission fluid in their brakes and it was over. They had to replace every rubber part in the entire car. Those things are just no-nos. Stick with the rules that they always say. Brake parts, brake fluid, lubricant. Oil parts that are designed to get with oil as a lubricant, and WD-40 kind of fits in there for those things, okay? The things that are designed to be with coolant, use water, soap, or coolant. And I use coolant as one of the best lubricants there is for coolant parts, if it's O-rings or anything like that. Anything that is designed to be exposed to the material you have, that's what you use as a lubricant. This craziness about WD-40 ruining stuff is, I've just never seen it. So anyway, if you want to make comments about that, go for it. But I'm going to tell you right now, 40 years, I've got data that tells me that it's fine. It just depends on what you're using it on. And I won't use it on certain things. But, educate yourself, learn, practice, find what works and what doesn't, and stick with it. And that's all I can tell you. I'll talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.